Well, hello there. Good morning, and welcome once again to my little corner of the internet, um, as it were, my very tiny little corner of. But it's always my pleasure to share art with people in a different kind of way than just static social media, and perhaps to share my thoughts and insights, and maybe even to do things that will inspire you. So it's Tuesday, and yesterday I coloured this with distress inks. I used them like watercolour paints. So I suppose technically this is a line and wash or ink and wash or pen and wash drawing, painting, piece of art. But what I have done is I've added some more embellishments where, I don't know if you see here, the very bright ones here are yellow. And I've put some green dots down here. I wish I'd used the yellow though. And I've also used a graphite pencil. It's a Prismacolor Ebony, which is really quite nice to smooth out. It's not gritty, it's really smooth. And it's just subtle enough that it's added extra layer, or extra layers, extra shadow, extra contrast to this, but without becoming overwhelmingly dark as well, which makes me quite happy. And I'm really quite happy and quite pleased with all of this. So I don't think I've got anything else to show particularly in this particular sketchbook, not really. I've got some drawings that I've been doing and things that are works in progress. This one I'm going to work on today, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But I thought you might like to see yesterday's. This is upside down-ish, but then with most of my art, or a lot of my art, it doesn't matter which way up it is, apart from my initials are that way. You get the idea, is that I've added to this, I think I showed this at the weekend, where I used Ecoline ink, watercolour inks, to add colour to this, and Tombow markers. But I went back over it a couple of days ago. It wasn't yesterday, it was the day before. So on Sunday, and I've used ballpoint pens, coloured ballpoint pens, to add shadow and texture to a lot of the areas, the leaves here, around here, everywhere, to try to bring layers out more. And then what I was doing yesterday was using I think it was a De La Rowney drawing pencil in sepia, and spreading that out. These drawing pencils are sort of charcoaly in feel, almost chalky in feel, but they're not quite chalky either. But the sepia I thought would blend really nicely with these browns, and you can see areas where I've added the sepia pencil and areas where I haven't. And again, it's just bringing out this sense of dimension. So I've done this. Then what I've spent time doing this morning is working on this in particular. I'm really not at all sure about the design or anything. I've done these collaged pieces of paper that are coloured with distress oxides and or distress inks. Actually, or distress inks. I tend not to use them together. And obviously the background paper, as I've said before, has been coloured with distress inks entirely. And the drawing has been done on here. I've used that's a Sakura metallic pen, jelly roll pen. So a gold one here, just to add this. And I have put gold dots on here, but when I rubbed the pencil out, the gold got rubbed off, so I can go back and add that. But the pen drawing was done with a Uniball eye pen, which seems to be my go-to pen at the moment. I like the consistent line. I like the way the ink is waterproof, that it's very black and pigmented, and it doesn't seem to shift with anything much in the way of water or distress inks or anything. Not that I've tried adding distress inks over it to colour the paper. But either way, I'm happy to start with coloured paper and work on the top of it. But this, you can see, has got a lot of shading in it, and I've done that with a humble fine point black biro. And I want to add colour to this to see how that will look. And this will be a more traditional pen and wash, I suppose, with a lot of detail there. And then this is one that I finished drawing earlier. Again, there's lots of metallic here. I really want to bring that out by using washes of colour. And here in places I've started to add some shadows and contrast and highlight. And I'm trying to pick up places rather than do everything like I did in the previous image. Try and pick up places where I really like that contrast to be, that would help to give, you know, that's, I'm likely to end up doing all sorts, and it may be that I work out that, well, the biro would be nice here, but it'd be nice to just use perhaps the black ebony or a different coloured pencil that I can tone in. I don't know yet. I'm just considering what to do. So we have this. I'm not going to work on this today. I want to sit with it for a bit and decide what to do, nor this one, because I have to decide whether I'm going to finish adding sepia, which I have done to quite a large number of areas, or whether I'm going to leave it as it is. I'm not sure how much of a difference it actually makes, but I thought this would be a nice one to add colour to, because I don't really know what I want to do in terms of shading with it, but I can add the colour and then decide that afterwards. So I have chosen my palette of Distress inks, which I'll talk through. I've got Tea Dye, Rusty Hinge, Vintage Photo, Shabby Shutters, Bundled Sage, Peeled Paint and Iced Spruce. I've chosen Iced Spruce because it's a grey green, and I think it will help if I need that extra bit of dimension or shadow. These are really nice colours. And, you know, I never thought I'd say this, the more vintagey colours are my favourites. I've always loved bright colours in the past, and things that are very brightly coloured I'm finding very challenging now, whereas the more vintagey coloured, particularly where I stick to a fairly monochrome scheme or a very simple colour scheme, seem to work really nicely for me. So I've gone with browns and greens because the background of this has got some hints of brown in. I'm not entirely sure, and there's hints of green there. This is Pine Needles. I recognise that green. Can't remember what these colours. It looks a bit like Rusty Hinge here. And the background may be either old paper or antique linen. Might be old paper, but I can't remember because I don't write it down. And I've got this collage piece of paper, which I don't know what I'm going to do with. It can stay there for now. It may become like, inverted commas, a cartouche where I put a word in or a quote in, so this ends up this way, and I draw some more. There's no time limit to how I finish it, or it could just be a page that I use as a test piece. Of this, I'll just move these out the way so I can start putting them onto my palette while I chat away, because I am going to keep these out, and I'm going to keep them in the order that I added them, so I can always go on the top, leave some space in between just in case I want to. I think these might need a bit of re-inking at some point soon, which is fine. So yesterday I used a water brush, one that's got water in a reservoir, so it's the bristles can be constantly wet or damp, and the Caran d'Ache ones, they've got a piston filler. And it also means that I can, the way that the little button on the side works means that I can actually control. These definitely need some more ink at some point soon. The amount of water there is, but it's not as controllable as something like, just get my glasses, like a water, you know, brush and pot of water and a bit of tissue to wipe any excess water off on. So have a look. This is just tea dye, and I'll do a little bit while I chat, and then I'm going to speed this up so you don't have to sit through the whole process. But it's even though it's line and wash, wash implies that you're using just bold, you know, areas of colour with perhaps a little bit, you know, there are opportunities to add shading and shadow in and to add other colours. which is exactly what I'm doing here. I will need to re-ink these ink pads. Luckily my re-inkers, I know where they are. I haven't got to go fiddling around for them too much. But it's just a nice way to add colour. And because I'm using the Distress ink palette, it works well with the background colours as well. This one is Rusty Hinge, which is one of my favourite colours here. And if I, this and a blue, rusty colours, corroded colours. You can see the difference between that and the tea dye. I'm just going to add a little hint of it here just to darken those colours. And here I just need to spread that out just a little bit more. Rusty Hinge is definitely one of my all-time favourites, or my current favourite in the Distress range. You can use the oxides like this, but I've never really been very successful in using Distress oxides as watercolours. So, but we shall see. Now then, just do a bit there. I just want to test, what I'm really doing here is just showing colours and seeing how I can perhaps use them in these. This is the Shabby Shutters, which is quite a pale green, but it is it's a lovely muted green at the same time. So I've decided these crystals need to be green, and I'm just colouring different sections in with the Shabby Shutters here, just to get a feeling of what colour I'd like in different places, I think, more than anything. It is very subtle against the background, but I can see the difference. Hopefully you can on the camera. The only problem I have with, it's not a problem, but it's just something I need to be, people need to be aware of, is that Distress inks, like the Ecolines actually, aren't light fast, which means they will fade in time if exposed to light. Whereas this is sitting in a sketchbook that's likely to be kept closed most of the time. And if I do decide to produce it as art, say for my Redbubble shop or something like that, then I'll be scanning it in and doing a digital version of it, that kind of way. But I don't know yet whether I'm going to do that. I'm going to see how it turns out, because it's the right kind of thing to do, really. There we go. I'm still drinking my mocha. It's a mocha morning. It's quite cool here and fresh, windy. The sun's actually disappeared, and it's lovely to wake up on cool mornings like this. Well, I think it is, because it's got that autumnal nip in the air. This one is this is peeled paint. I'm just checking. I thought it was. It is a much darker kind of green, which is great. And I'm much happier using, already I can feel I'm a much happier artist with the paintbrush today. I just feel I'm getting a better application of colour. I'm more comfortable with it. because again I can just control how much water there is and how much colour there is a lot easier than I can with a water brush. I find them to be quite hit and miss, I suppose, in some ways, with a bit random in how water's applied, which is great if you don't mind that kind of randomness. This is a hint of what's the other one, bundled sage now in places, so I'm working with all three. Of these paints, of these inks, paints really, because I'm using them as paints. And look. And that really does help these to stand out somewhat, doesn't it? I think so. Bundled sage, I think, is one of my favourites in the greens of distress inks. There are plenty of bright colours in distress inks, and they're designed to create grungy, distressed, imperfect, perfectly imperfect, as Tim Holt says, a phrase I often used long before I heard him say it, is that, not that I'm making claim to it, because I'm sure lots of people have said such things over time. It's just one of those things, it's a fact. Yeah. It's like I was drawing things like this, which can be described as Entangled inspired, long before I discovered that Entangled was a thing. It doesn't mean that I'm saying I invented Entangled or came up with the idea first. I didn't, because they have a particular method that's used in how they work, and it just happens that I tend to work in a similar kind of way inside my art. So I'm not disparaging them at all. I enjoy watching their videos and looking at what they produce, and it's all, you know, it gives ideas, like looking at anybody's kind of art. Sometimes it's just for the sheer admiration of the creativity and artisanship, and sometimes you think, oh, never thought of that, that's a good idea, I'm going to try that one out. How do they look? I'm going to peer at the screen. Actually, that's brought them out quite a bit, hasn't it? Hasn't it? It has. Okay. Now then, these here, I'm determined to make them green, but I've got a sneaky suspicion there may be a hint of tea dye or something else going on in them, just to bring a bit of variation in colour in. Need a bit more, like that. And some more tea dye. This is why I will let the colours do their things and sort of like blend with one another, rather than getting overly het up in trying to blend them out perfectly. Something I'm learning to work with in terms of watercolour in particular is this idea of letting things just blend as they wish, and create what pattern they will within an area. The control I have is that I want it within an area. So that's what I do. Do you think that tea dye just gives a lovely little hint of different shade of colour at the top? A little bit of warmth actually. The green is quite warm. It's a yellowy one. It's not really. I'm not sure whether it's warm or not, to be honest. I'm wittering here. Can you tell? Of course you can. Of course, these colours do pick up the distress inks from the background as well. This is the ice spruce going here, because I want that to look like it's in shadow, but what I'm going to do, I could really mess this up, but I don't think I will. That's great. Part of me's thinking, ooh, aged mahogany would be great here, and I'm thinking, no, let's stick to a relatively small number of colours here, is it? And work with what I've got. That certainly will help with coherence, and it will mean that I don't overwhelm myself with colour as well. So that's something I've learned as well. Obviously, it does depend what I'm doing. Is something like Doodle Worlds, or if I'm doing a particularly large Entangled drawing, colouring book, then yeah, I allow myself to use plenty of colour. But when it comes to colouring in my own personal work, and this may actually transfer to the more Entangled and pieces of work and mandalas and so on, is that a limited colour palette is something that I really enjoy using. And as they say in Zentangle, there's an elegance of limits. Perhaps there is an elegance in it. Now this is vintage photo, and it's not the brown I was hoping for, so I'm going to go back to my tin of browns, and I'm going to go and hunt out a different brown that will have more of a contrast. Brush corduroy is more of a yellowy brown. I'm not quite sure whether I want to use that. The aged mahogany is lovely, but I don't want to use that here. Ground espresso may be nice because it's much darker. Walnut stain's nice. The gathered twigs is also nice. Yeah, I'll go with walnut stain. I'll leave the vintage photo there because it may be that I just need to use, oh gosh, I don't know if you can see. Move my tin out of the way. That's walnut stain. And that looks really dark there, but obviously how dark it is depends on how much water I add to it. If I only want a little bit of it, which is what I'm going to require here, I'll keep the vintage photo out because on the palette, because I can use it perhaps mixed with others or in a different way. I think I just need to spend some time swatching these later today, distress inks, so I've got a reference for them. And yeah, I've added a bit more there, so that adds quite a dark colour, dark tone there, which isn't necessarily what I wanted, but it's what it is. So, and here I'm just going to use Rusty Hinge, and I'm going to allow the colour to bead up at the bottom right, left even, of these little balls, so that hopefully when it dries there'll be a darker area there. That's what I'm hoping for anyway. It's not going to, it looks like it's just going to spread, but that's okay, I can always add more. That I'm really disappointed with this here. Let me have a look. We had some bundled, that's better. Toning that down a bit with bundled sage, that makes it feel a bit better. I'm still not that happy, but I also know I can do things about it later on. Okay, I'm talking of bundled sage. I think it'll be absolutely fab here. These remind me of sweets we used to have in the UK. I think they're called bullseyes, and they were a kind of gobstopper. So a hard-boiled sweet that would take forever to dissolve and to wear down. You couldn't, sink your teeth into them because you'd end up breaking your teeth, if not your jaw. I don't know why they were called bullseyes. I don't think it's because, my head goes, oh, they don't look like eyes from bulls. But then looking at it now, I'm thinking, oh, it could be like bullseyes as in a target. I can be extremely literal about things, and I can miss subtleties and nuances, and if somebody's gently teasing me about something, I can get too serious and miss the point of it completely. And I often need people to be very obvious with me about such things, because, say, I can get way too serious. It doesn't matter if you're talking to me. If you're talking to me, I can often pick up the subtle signs. But if it's through texts or on social media or whatever, I can completely miss that somebody's being tongue-in-cheek and take things all too seriously, because you haven't got a visual cue of somebody's expression or the tone of their voice, and I really do get confused and confuddled by it very easily. So I'll decide what I do about those other bits in a little bit. Okay. And this is the walnut stain on its own without any other colour, and I am going to add some more at the top. Because I really want a darker area under here. My problem is that if I fuss around with all of this too much, I'm going to end up pilling the paper. It's more robust in the Sea White sketchbooks than many other sketchbooks, but at the same time it's still not watercolour paper, so it's not meant to have layer after layer after layer of colour added. So that's with a hint of the rusty hinge going in there. Yep, the rusty hinge. More rusty hinge there. And perhaps with just a little hint of this on that side, just to darken one edge a little bit more than the other. Pick up a bit more of that just for here and there, and then around here as well, I think. Trying to get some sense of shadows in there, even if I'm not going to get it completely. That one there with the rusty hinge is working out really quite nicely, I think. So let's do something similar with tea dye, because I can. Because the tea dye is a much paler colour. It's get a different kind of feeling with it. So I'm going to add some rusty hinge in there, because it will give a different colour. A subtle colour, but a different one. There we go, that's better. So I've done a fair amount already this morning. It's surprising how quickly the colour can build up. Obviously I'm being quite simple with colour because I plan to add that shadow, that depth with other media, either with other pens or pencils or in some way. And I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to do that. I'm going to see how this pans out. But I also know that some of the areas where I'm not happy with colours, like inside this little arc here, then I can do something about that with other pens, using things like Sakura souffles or metallic pens. Will add embellishments to it that means those will be noticeable and will take away, some of that colour that's underneath. But I said earlier I'm going to carry on recording and time-lapse it. Well, I will do, but not with this video. I'll do it as a separate one to upload tomorrow. And oh no, tomorrow's Wednesday. Wednesday's template Thursday on a Wednesday day. We get a sneak peek of this week's template for the Facebook fan group. Sorry, water there. You'll see me picking at things. I'm a fidget. So I'm going to say thank you for joining me before I carry on a long ramble again. Let me know thoughts about what you see below or any suggestions. And take care of yourselves. Enjoy the rest of your day, week, or however long it is until you return. And please find time to be creative every day, whatever creativity means to you. Take care now. Bye-bye.